I was really excited to try Highguard, but thanks to holiday plans, I was away for the first 2 weeks that it was out. Now I'm back home and I've had the chance to play about 10 hours of the game. Did it live up to expectations? For me, yes, mostly. But there's some parts of the game I really don't like. Let's start with a big positive. The developers said that they were doing something new with their first-person shooter game, and I think they delivered. Highguard doesn't play like anything else I can think of, and I play an awful lot of games. It doesn't feel anything like Overwatch, or Concord, or Paladins, or Apex Legends, or any of the other games that people were assuming it would be copying based on that trailer. It genuinely does feel like something completely new, and a game mode that I think has some real legs. But this does lead me to the first big negative too. It's also nothing like Titanfall. The trailer showed some incredible movement, with characters using the mounts, leaping into the air, seemingly building up momentum as they launched attacks. That was the magic that made Titanfall so brilliant. The sense of inertia and how you could reach incredible speeds if you knew what you were doing and planned your route right. Unfortunately, Highguard doesn't have any of that. Yes, you can climb up walls a little bit, but it's kind of clumsy. Summoning mounts and transitioning to ziplines is nice and snappy, but that's about it. One character has an ability that lets them jump into the air and throw down attacks. That's the one shown in the trailer, but none of the others have anything to do with movement really. Maybe the fault was with my expectations, but I was hoping for some kind of cross between Titanfall and that old Magic and Guns based first-person shooter Shadowrun for the movement, with characters leaping around the environment using magic to pull off crazy maneuvers. But there's absolutely none of that. Instead, you're pretty grounded for the most part. Sliding and jumping feels very pedestrian, and little touches that have become common in modern FPS games, like leaning a little bit when you look around corners. It's just completely absent. The movement feels boring, and at times, actively bad. Which is a problem when in this game you do need to constantly cross big distances and climb around quite complex structures. Now I think this is where a lot of the negative reviews for the game came from. Obviously there was a bit of a hate campaign going on after the trailer, and I don't think I'll ever understand that or those people, but then the first impressions of the game that most people had was the tutorial. And the tutorial is terrible. It's incredibly basic, and it forces you to wander around a pretty boring environment where the only thing you can really do is experiment with the movement and do a little bit of shooting. And both of these are quite boring. The movement's dull, the shooting's just functional at best, the guns feel incredibly generic compared to what we saw in games like Apex Legends and Titanfall that a lot of these developers worked on. And so when everybody's first impression of the game is a tutorial that highlights the worst elements of it, it's not a surprise that a lot of people that went into this expecting not to like the game felt vindicated, left a bad review and uninstalled. Even now, 2 weeks later, only 74% of players have the achievement on Steam for completing the tutorial. So a quarter of players didn't even get to the end of it to play a proper game. But once you do play a proper game, the creativity shines through and the game really starts to show what's so special about it. There's distinct phases in each match that repeat, and I think this is pretty unique. I can't think of many other games that work this way. You start off with a few seconds to build defenses, and that's kind of a waste of time right now because reinforced walls don't do a lot to slow anyone down. Hopefully that'll get fixed in the future, but then you go out into the world to gear up. And in my first few games I understood the criticisms people had about this phase. The map is too big, there's not enough to do, looting isn't very interesting. People have been saying that since like the very first day this game came out, and while I do still get that, I understand where they're coming from, I think these phases are actually really good and are important because they give you a little bit of downtime. Once you get more used to the game and a bit more sweaty about it, I guess, you start trying to optimize these phases, so you search for your ideal loadout, you hit up the main loot spots, you might mess with the enemy and try and pick off any stragglers, you secure airdrops to get the best weapon in the game. But if you're just playing casually or you're playing with friends or a chatty squad, It's quite a nice bit of time to just relax and have a chat. I've spoken before in other videos about how important this is in any kind of social game. When you play a game with constant action, like Call of Duty multiplayer, there's no time to chat, no time to hang out or make jokes. It's just constant pressure, constant action. In some of the most fun multiplayer games, like for me, Sea of Thieves, Fall Guys, Among Us, even Call of Duty's DMZ, there's downtime built into the modes where you can just take a breather and entertain yourselves, whether that's between a round or while you're traveling somewhere. This is admittedly boring if you're playing by yourself, but it's really nice to have when you're in a group. And then of course, the shield breaker spawns and you go and fight over it. Again, I think this is a clever phase and pretty innovative. You have an objective, but it can go many different ways. If you win the fight of the sword and take it, you know the enemy's going to respawn before you can get to their base, so you've got to decide between trying for a mad dash, setting up to ambush them somewhere, or, as I've seen more and more often, burning a bit of time until overtime starts by looting a bit more, and then when the overtime goes in where no one can respawn anymore, then you have a proper fight to the death and get a free raid out of it. These sections can end up as crazy chases around the huge maps, across zip lines and through ravines on mounts, or sometimes there'll be tense firefights in abandoned temples and cellars. It always feels memorable and different, and victory feels earned. The raids themselves, after someone has managed to complete overtime by killing the enemy team or has planted the shield breaker, are probably the best part of the game. Whether you're desperately trying to spot the attackers as they worm their way into your base, shutting down their advances and their routes, or if you're the infiltrators yourself and you're coming up with strategies on the fly to try and get into those generator rooms, it's like the game quickly switches to something else like Counter-Strike or Rainbow Six Siege, where you know you've only got a few lives and minutes before you're kicked out and punished with a loss of points, so you've got to innovate, you've got to come up with a good idea to try and get past the other team. I love this game mode, I really do. I think it's a shame that it's been let down by the lackluster movement and the weapons, and the terrible first impressions, that I think has contributed a lot to the lower player numbers. This is the sort of game that shows a lot of promise. I personally think the visual style is really great, I think the aesthetic's really cool for it. I think the game mode is absolutely fantastic, the setting seems really interesting, I like the characters and their abilities. I think this could really benefit from a sequel that sharpens up those core mechanics and adds a little bit more flair. But sadly, I don't think a sequel is in the cards for this game. I'm personally definitely going to keep on playing it. It feels fresh to me right now, it's the first person shooter that I'm enjoying the most, and I'm always looking for games that are doing something a bit different. I just wish it had made a better first impression.